Hello, everyone. Welcome to another awesome day of FileMaker training. I'm Richard Carlton, creator of FMTraining.tv, where every day at this time slot, we are having awesome FileMaker training and talking about the Claris FileMaker platform. So we have a series of shows, and they're kind of being run by HOnza here, which is very exciting, and he's interviewing people and talking to them. So we are very happy to have HOnza here. HOnza, turning over command to you. Are you ready to assume command? We're going to
Yeah, definitely.
the admiral is going to step away. The captain of the ship is HOnza. He's going to drive the ship now. Yes, you ready?
Yes, ready.
All right, transferring command to HOnza. Go, go, go.
Okay, Roger. And here, when talking about this ship, we have a new person coming, and I'm going to talk to Johan Hedman from Sweden here today, because this series that Richard mentioned about is going to be about performance. You all know me, or many people know me for doing performance testing and worrying about FileMaker performance. So I decided to run a series of interviews with other people who also care about FileMaker performance and who have done significant discoveries and put a lot of effort into studying and what makes FileMaker slow and what makes it fast and how to get the most out of it. So Johan is one of them. And actually, less than a year ago, Johan attracted my attention to something that I was quite interested in when he started talking, and that's the impact of things or different kinds of clients connecting to FileMaker Server and their impact on the performance of the other clients, and especially if those clients are different kinds, like if you have like 10 users connecting with FileMaker Pro and then having a website talking to the FileMaker server through data API, how that actually affects the performance of those Pro clients. So this got me quite interested because this is very difficult to kind of scientifically measure what the impact is, and knowing, having some insight into this can be quite crucial when you deploy a solution that actually does allow different kinds of clients to connect. So Johan, can you give us some introduction to this topic and what brought you to start doing these tests and what you discovered?
Of course. Thanks, HOnza. Yeah, so my name is Johan Hedman, and I work for a platinum partner called Square Moon over here in Sweden. So hopefully I'm going to meet you all in Austin in a few months there, but when Engage is going to take place. But yeah, so we do have a really, really big client, whereas there are about 30 to 40 FileMaker users that are constantly hacking on the server. But besides that, we also have a bunch of APIs from outsiders to reach the server, plus using WebDirect. So the impact on the server got really, really crucial because we can see that we got the spinning wheel or the coffee cup that we know are performance hits by the server. So we started to kind of elaborate and saying, where are our bottlenecks? And we know HOnza are really great at finding bottlenecks, but this wasn't actually on the calculation engine or the layout part that was causing it. It was that we had too much traffic doing more or less the same thing, which caused other parts of the solution to go down on its knees. So what Claris are saying is that the FileMaker platform and the different engines are multi-threaded. So on one of our bigger clients, we have a magnificent machine with 8 CPUs, 72 gigabytes of memory. So there shouldn't be any way of a tiny little FileMaker software to be able to get anywhere close to getting that one to hit any bottlenecks. But it's actually rather easy because each of these services are only talking to one of the CPUs per time. Not meaning that, for example, the data API to split out this workload over a number of CPUs. Therefore, it's very important that each one of those CPUs have enough power to do the work that they need to. Was that a good introduction?
Yes, definitely. And so you mentioned multi-threading and single threading and CPUs. So what does that really mean? I know that with FileMaker Server 18, there was a lot of talk about multi-threading, and then it went kind of away. I recall back in Liechtenstein a few weeks ago, Douglas Wallace actually admitted that it didn't work, and they reverted back to having the database engine completely single-threaded again. So what based on your experience is the actual use of CPUs and threads, and which parts of the FileMaker server can actually leverage additional CPUs and which cannot?
So we do have a bunch of different engines in the server. We have the one called FM server, which are kind of operating like a base layer at the top for everything. And then you have one machine for each of these different services. So there's one for the data API, another one for the OData. There's one for the CWP, custom web publishing. There's one for the script engine, and there's another one for the helper and one for backup. If you were to hit something at the same time that will leverage a lot of workload on each and every one of them, you would see that if you had a lot of CPUs, that the machine itself were pretty good of spreading those ones out so that each one of those machines were working on one of these CPUs. But there's no way for example, the script engine to run on multiple CPUs at the same time. So if a CPU starts reaching the top layer 100% of what it can do, it will start reaching the bottleneck of when it's going to start acting slow. And there are a bunch of things that can cause that, and of course a number of limitations for each of these different machines.
Okay, so what in your experience is the optimal number of CPUs for FileMaker Server?
So if you look at the specification of what FileMaker expect of you when you have a really big solution, they want you to have a fast CPU, and you want to have at least 4, and then they want you to have a lot of memory. And if you go to a provider like AWS, for example, you can choose a machine that are big on memory and therefore will work faster for you, so that you in your FileMaker solution can have a lot of data stored in the memory, because that's quicker to look into the memory than actually writing back and forward to the server. So there's probably a threshold of how much memory FileMaker could use, because you don't want anything to be crashing if you have a lot of things in the memory. It's not being stored into your database. So the exact amount of memory that will be the perfect match is probably depending on what different parts of the FileMaker server you actually use. So that's going to be a very unique way for each of the different solutions. But for that big client that I started to talk a little bit about, I'd say that one uses almost all of the different server engines quite hard, meaning we'll need a lot of CPUs to leverage the workload.
And what was the most surprising discovery for you in this regard? Like when you discover that basically per each process you need the one CPU, what surprised you?
Probably I wasn't so surprised that FileMaker actually wasn't multi-threaded in the way that we thought it was. Probably. I mean, that would have been really good if it was really, really multi-threaded through all CPUs. But when we were starting to look into the charts of how each and every one of those CPUs were running, we could clearly see that each one of those were hitting the roof on certain occasions. And then if you build really good logs or look at the log posts of how FileMaker behave, you can see which of the different layouts that are loading badly, like Richard talked about earlier. You could also see which scripts that are doing badly by looking at the top code statistics. And if you build all of this up to become like a log of what actually happens in your database, you can see what things are bad for you. And one of the things that are really bad for you is to have too many CWP sessions at the same time. That is usually old PHP code that you have. And one of the biggest problem with that is that you make a request to your database, but you don't log out. That means that that specific user becomes idle and it stays on your server. And I'd like to share a little picture of what that could look like. So let me share my screen here. Let me see. Very good. Okay, so everyone knows that FileMaker writes to temp files to keep track of each unique user of what they've been doing to the server. So when you log in, it stores your information on what layout you've been to, some of the records you've been to. So you know that if you do a search for a record in a table, second time you do it, it will probably go a lot faster because it's already stored in your temp file. So the more you work around in your database, back and forward, throwing through lists and card views, doing different searches, that file might increase to get bigger. In some cases, it will become several megabytes of data, which is probably good because then it will be really quick for you to get to your information. But most of the files, the temp files that you have, are rather small, like this one here, which is only 56 KB. But FileMaker can only handle a certain amount of these users before you start running into problems with the different engines. So with the CWP engine, you can reach up to about 200 CWP users that you can see in the admin console. But when you have that amount of CWP users, FileMaker is going to start losing track of who asked for what. And after 200, you're going to run into a problem. Most probably, you're going to crash CWP as well. So the leverage here is to try to keep the number of CWP users as low as possible. And to do that, you can use the admin API to disconnect idle CWP users. So in the admin API, there's ways to show me the list of clients that are currently logged up to your server. And then you can look at each of those that are connected with a type of CWP. And then if they've been idle for more than, for example, 3 minutes, you can start disconnect them. Same thing with WebDirect. If you have a users that have been hanging and you only have one machine where you installed FileMaker Server, then an idle or an connection to WebDirect might cause you to the WebDirect being crashing because it can't keep the connection open. If you have a WebDirect solution where you have a master machine and multiple working machines, and one of the connection to one of the working machines lose its connections, then there won't be any way to adding up new users for WebDirect because that one is stalling all the communication with WebDirect. So the only way to get rid of that and having people able to log in again would be to restart the whole solution, starting with the master machine and then restarting of all the working machines. So these temp files that you see here are actually really, really important. So one of the things that we always do is that whenever we have a release or we have a service windows of some kind, we always make sure we go into the temp folder of, for example, in Windows, there will be in Windows, there will be in a temp folder, and make sure we don't have any of these FileMaker temp files. So we delete those files to make sure we always start up fresh. Because if you close FileMaker Server and you have these temp files available which haven't logged out, FileMaker will start by looking into these temp files and see if they can reconnect. But if you actually close server, then there wouldn't be any way of reconnecting.
So how do you find out where these files are stored?
Yes, so on Windows machine, they're stored under the drive where you installed FileMaker Server, and usually I do that on the OS. So then it will be under C, Windows, and then the temp folder. If you go in there, you will probably see that you have something like this. So you have probably 30, 40, 50 connection if you only use FileMaker. But if you start using CWP and you have people connecting from partner pages or from other APIs that you set up, you could see that you can end up having more than hundreds of these connections. And when FileMaker say that you can have up to 1,000 FileMaker Pro users connecting at the same time, what they're actually talking about is having a way of controlling this by having these temp files.
So are you saying that you discovered that you need to delete those files manually because FileMaker Server fails to do so, or?
Yeah. So in a release not too long ago, let me go wrong way. There, we should go forward. They released a way for us to purge these temp files. So they added a way for us into in FileMaker Admin Console to be able to delete these temp files that no longer were of any use. By setting up a new script schedule, using the system script as system default purge temp files, and using a system script with a file and set it to run whenever you want it to. In my case, I choose to run it in the middle of the night. And if you scan this barcode, you can read more about it. This is FileMaker's own information of how you can handle and download that purge file that needs to be run on your Windows machine. With this, you're able to get rid of some of these temp files that aren't in use, but not everyone. So what we built is something that we call the FileMaker Server Connection Manager. And what that one is doing is that every 3 minutes, we are open it up by a script schedule to open up and look with the Admin API to disconnect the idle users that you see down below on the right side here. All of these CWP users that's being connected for more than 3 minutes. That's to avoid having too many CWP users connected at the same time, to not have the problem of running into too many connections at the same time.
How is that different from setting the idle timeout in the configuration to 3 minutes? Shouldn't that be also disconnecting them automatically?
I wish that was the case. I really wish that was the case. I've seen personally that in some ways it's doing good by handling that for FileMaker Pro users and for WebDirect users. But for the connection with Data API and CWP users, it doesn't seem to work so well. So it's not disconnecting like you think it should or you want it to. So what would be much better would be if we in FileMaker Admin Console had a way of saying, for the Pro engine, I like them to be disconnected after 15 minutes, or for the WebDirect, I like them to be disconnected after being idle for 3 minutes, and for CWP for after 2 minutes. That would be a good way of handling the idle people so that they actually were disconnected like we expect them to do.
And can you recognize the idle users from active users in the admin API?
No, that's the big problem. So in Admin API, it will tell you how long you've been logged in. Same way as you can say here, saying in the column for sign in, it says the number of hours or minutes or since it logged in. But it wouldn't give you if it's actually idle or not. But for the CWP, what happens is that one is when you get too many of those connections, there is no way for FileMaker's CWP engine to disconnect these ones, even though it should know that it actually have lost this connection because it only requested one thing and then nothing happened. In the Data API, you need to ask for a token. And then when that token expires, you thought that this user will automatically disappear. And if you don't have too many data API users, that's actually what happens. Then FileMaker Server acts like you expect it to do and disconnect the user. But if you have a lot of data API users accessing at the same time, then it will lose track of which one that actually passed out, and it doesn't disconnect them at all. So for the data API, if you're really pushing it hard, if you have one data API user doing multiple calls at the same time, unfortunately, you can crash the data API engine with like 2 or 3 seconds. So if you build a code to generate a lot of calls at the same time towards the data API, then you can crash it within seconds. But if you instead ask for unique data API tokens, then if you do a lot of calls at the same time, you can have, and a lot of calls, and I mean somewhere in between 10 to 25 per second. That's a lot of calls. So not a lot of solutions are built that way, but if you have more than 25 calls within a second, even though they have unique tokens, then FileMaker Data API would go down as well. So for this bigger solution that I'm talking about right now, which is up and running 24/7 with 100 or even 1,000 of users accessing it from the outside, we needed to control that these engines are up and running 24/7. So we use Zabbix, which is a really good monitoring tool to keep track of that each one of these engines are up and running. By looking for the CWP and the data API, we looked into the Apache log to see, are there any action taking place? Is the server up and running or not? And then we're using CLI commands to restart the machine if it's not up and running. That is the way to make sure you always have the different engines up and running.
And I guess with the web users, like you can actually program it on the website so that it really does not care whether the next call is going to reuse the same session or start a new one, right?
Exactly. So since we have so many connections coming in at the same time, we had to build a proxy that sits outside of your web server that could cache some of the calls that you're doing. So not all of the calls actually have to go to your database, so that it could render the call back much faster to the user asking for some specific information. And then what the proxy can also do is that it could build a proxy pool, meaning if there are more than 25 calls coming in at the same time, then it will do one by one and release one by one, and then start taking from the pool one by one, so that you never exceed the 25 at the tops. So at peak hours of the day, like from 9 to 11 o'clock, or from late afternoon, then we do have so much traffic coming into the server that we need this proxy to help us out, because FileMaker Server can't handle all that traffic by itself.
So did you build that proxy yourself, or did you use some existing proxy software?
Yeah, so very good question here, HOnza. So there are a number of proxies you can buy out in the street from the shell and just install as it is. But in this case, we wanted a way to control this proxy, to set unique cache times and other things to the server to tell the software of when we wanted it to run. So if I go forward a little bit in my presentation here, let me see. Sorry, going fast here. Here. So we built a proxy that are looking at the FileMaker file for setting for each of the different functions that the API that they are using could call. And the timeout column that you see here, or the field in FileMaker, are telling them for every unique user, for every specific function, how many seconds should we cache the answer. So the get general value list are not changed that often. So therefore, the number of seconds before we actually need to call the database for the information we don't need to have that more than needed. So therefore, it's a very high number. But if you look down a little bit further down for the function get item price, it's 3,600 seconds, meaning an hour. So that price table updates sometimes, but not too often. But it's important that it's updated when few times. But if you go for a function all the way at the end there, see the update person, then the timeout is 0 because you always want to get a result if you're updating some information. So the get functions are asking for information, but the update are actually posting information into the database, and you want to get the right kind of answer back. So by doing this, we are now able to control all the traffic that comes into our database and setting it to be cached in the proxy. And a call like the get general list here, if it's cached, it's going to be responding 98% faster than calling FileMaker Server to get an answer. And FileMaker Server is still really, really fast. A call for get general list is a layout that consists of 4 or 5 fields, where text fields with whole different values. And that usually are down to 0.3, 0.4 seconds for that call. But having that come back 98% faster, that's a huge difference for each of the different users. And then what we have done in this part is that we needed also to leverage the workload. So if you look on the right side here, you can see that we have a column saying return response from. And the column that says REST-FM here is the one using CWP. And the column saying data API is the column calling the data API. So we can decide which function that we want to leverage to go to different engines to leverage the workload from all the calls that come in. Because if we had all the calls coming to one engine, we would crash the engine. So you could do this by leverage a different function going to different engines to offload work to different things. And when we're talking web traffic, we should not forget that we could do OData calls as well. So we could divide up the job even more than just between CWP and data API to get the workload being more balanced. We aren't really there with this function yet, but I know that John Renfrew had really good sessions, I think, last week about OData. And I know he's also going to presenting about that at Engage later on in March in Austin. So you should pay more attention to that as well. That's really important. Yeah, one other thing about this view is that in this function, we also have a way of doing duplicate requests. That means we will call both of the different engines with the same parameters for the same function to measure which of the functions are fastest for this function specifically. So if, for example, the get person seller detail is faster on REST-FM, then we will have it go by the CWP engine, whereas if the get subcontractor bill detail is faster than the data API, then we will use that. But we also need to make sure we have a decent amount of calls for the different engines throughout the day and at the same time.
So we could say that FileMaker Server basically has multiple different pipes through which you can pull data out of it, and you manage to create a proxy that actually dispatches the request coming from the web to use not one but all the pipes to pull the data out of FileMaker, right?
Correct, exactly like that.
That's excellent job. But we are talking for half an hour, and I see no questions coming through Discord. So I hope not everyone's head has exploded yet. Margaret, how is that on the other platforms?
People have been talking and like kind of absorbing the information because this is frankly something that isn't discussed very much. Most people that get into FileMaker only begin flirting with DAppy with like major customer projects. So realizing the actual extent and the limitations of it in this way has been a really, I think it's been fascinating. Some of the stuff that
Yeah.
Johan's been talking about, I had no idea because they tell us, "Oh, it'll do this," and I
Yeah.
I trust that they're not. I trust what they're telling me, and that maybe not be the best approach when it's in tech, and you should actually double check to make sure that the
Yeah,
documentation.
when I was watching Johan's presentation, I was literally like watching it with open mouth, because what he has achieved with this custom proxy and literally leveraging all the ways how to get the data out of FileMaker server concurrently, that's amazing. So, Johan, is this something that you're planning to offer as a product, or what is the future of this proxy?
So it's a compiled code right now that we use for a client. And then if anyone were really interested or had problems with CWP, Data API, or OData, let me know, and then we could probably discuss a way to get you going on this thing. We haven't really talked about making it into a product right now because we only have one client with this massive amount of request of data. And besides that, it's really hard to get to this limitation that we're talking about right now.
But you may not be the only one experiencing maybe intermittent crashes of the data APR or the web publishing engine, right?
Probably not. I've read quite a lot of things about it in the community, and I've shared a little bit of my knowledge there. But it's much easier to go on a stage like this and talk about it than writing it off in a few sentences. So it's definitely FileMaker have limitations, and we all know about it. It's not built to being a really good web source. But if you don't use FileMaker, if you use FileMaker for all your business, and then you have to offload the data that you want to use for your web services or the API that you put up, then you need to sync data. And syncing data back and forward, if you use 360's Works sync tool or whatever tool you choose, it's still going to be really hard to make sure you have the data up to date on all stages, because it's not just going to be one table, it's going to be multiple tables. I'm going to show another slide here to show how a day actually look like. Usually on a day, in the middle of the night, there is just a little bit of traffic. And then the server and the CPU that you have handle everything, and you don't have that much traffic. But if in the morning you can see how clearly it is that there's a spike going up early morning, and then it's like everyone's taking a coffee break. And then the day hits off, and then everyone starts working and then need to get to their information. So its spikes goes up and down, up and down, up and down, and using the resources that we have. And this is for the machine where we have 8 CPUs, and this is the total of all of those 8. So we aren't really hitting the top of how much all the CPUs could use together, because the average for all of them will get to this sum. But the problem with FileMaker is that if you looked at each one of these CPUs, you would see the problem that each one of them spikes to 100%. And that is exactly as if you were trying to search on an unstored calculation and you get the spinning wheel. FileMaker can't handle all the traffic, so you have to wait until something is finished before it can release that.
Maybe it's the time to show the slides that I prepared to ask for your comments. So if you don't mind, let me share my screen for a short moment. And so this is one slide that I borrowed from Clay Michael's State of the Union presentation from Claris Engage. And here you can see those pipes that I mentioned. So like in the bottom, we have the database server, and let me try to turn on the annotation tool. So this is the FileMaker server in the bottom, the main engine, and we have these pipes talking to it. So you can see that we have the XDBC, which is ODBC, and JDBC that has its own pipe. Then the CWPC has its own pipe, so that's all the web publishing. And then we have another one for I'm not sure I recall what UAC means, but maybe
The Tomcat and Vaden there is for usage of
that's, I
the
guess
web.
this is admin console, right? I think.
Yeah.
So those are the different pipes. Now we have one here for the FileMaker Pro clients. The WebDirect goes through this one as well. So this is the structure that we kind of have now, or this used to be the FileMaker 18. Now it's a slightly different. But what Clay was also showing is the future of FileMaker, and this is what what was quite interesting. Let me just remove those annotations because that's now no longer valid. So this is the future, and what's quite interesting here is this big OData.
Yes, very much so.
So as we could see on the previous slide, the OData today, there was no OData in FileMaker 18, but today OData still goes through this channel. Here we have OData today in FileMaker 21.0.2. There's still OData, and that's coming through. Sorry, not here. I just made a mistake. So OData is today actually coming through this channel, the XML. So today in FileMaker 2021, OData is going through the XML channel. The future of FileMaker, and I'm not sure if we are talking about FileMaker 2025 coming next year, but hopefully yes. And this was with a lot of excitement presented by John Refrew in Rome. The new OData is actually going to come directly through this pipe. So OData in the future is going to talk directly to the FileMaker database engine, not through the web stuff here. And so that's a huge thing. But what other interesting things can we notice in this architecture change, in your opinion?
So there have been limitation with the ODBC driver before, and now when we are reusing that one for OData as well, I haven't been able to test it out yet, but there used to be a limitation on how many connections you could have from the outside to your database using the ODBC. And now that we're reusing that one and they're adding new functionality to the same layer, my hopes are that they increased the way that it communicates more, so it can communicate more than it used to be. Because the OData client that you're using are reaching your FileMaker database on a totally other level. It will actually reach your tables directly, your records directly. It's not going to be relying on the layouts that you have. Therefore, they can reach much more data if they want to, and then can use that data in a way that they want as well. I had a project long time ago, and I shouldn't say that's up to date right now, where we find out that if you try to have more than 10 ODBC users at the same time connecting from the outside, then FileMaker would stall more or less, and ODBC might crash, or it would just be very, very slow. And now you could set up 10 OData users accessing at the same time to leverage the load for your web access needs. But remembering OData works quite differently to what you do with any CWP or data API requests. They are layout depending instead of being table dependent. So for me, it would be really, really cool if someone were to set up a test about this and show me how much and how fast the OData will respond compared to what we have right now for CWP and data API.
Okay, well, one more comment that I heard is that there is actually going to be Nginx playing the primary role in all the three platforms, Mac, Windows, and Linux. Any comments on that?
So if that's the case, and it's going to be working for all three platforms, there will be an enhancement, and hopefully that's the case. But this is a slide about the future, so that might not be the case what's actually going to be installed. So until we actually see that, I'd say that would be really nice to have.
Okay, and when you mentioned that 10 ODBC client could stall FileMaker, you really did mean that also it would stall for the FileMaker Pro clients connected, right?
Yes, because when you're calling the database through the XDBC and you are trying to make changes to a table that will be read-write, that will affect anything that's trying to do the same thing. And a record locking could be caused to record level, or if you're using too many global fields at the same time that say or different people are trying to access, it kind of looks like we have a problems where writing to global fields that you use in, for example, relationship could cause it to stall as well. So when we have more users accessing the same data with the same tables, you could run into record locking problems for multiple purposes. So it's super important whenever you're having anything accessing from outside that you handle record locking in a good way.
But isn't there also a database-wide locking mechanism on the server on the database engine level?
Yeah, so the backup that you see all the way down on the left side there, that's its own unique machine or service that FileMaker uses to run the backups. And since FileMaker are storing some of its data in the cache and the memory, and once you do the backup, you want to have a snapshot of what it looks like to store as much as possible into the backup. So if you have too much data that's being changed at the same time, it might not be that all data is actually backed up. And if you're running that process at the same time where you have a lot of data, that backup, we already know, if you do a heavy import right before you're going to do a backup, that backup is going to take a lot longer than the usual backups. So if you have a lot of change of data back and forward, the backup will take longer to run. And we always want to have a number of backups throughout the day, but we need to have them run on a time where most of these changes aren't happening for you at the same time, if possible.
So this is just a kind reminder that as an additional backup method to having like scheduled backups, you should always also enable the progressive backups, right? Because unlike the scheduled backups, the progressive backups are not locking the database because they are actually happening aside of the main database changes, because they are basically FileMaker. When you make a change, FileMaker is writing the change to two places. One is the primary database, and the other one is the progressive backup.
And then when you do a progressive, you only store the changed things since the last backup that you did, which will render a lot faster. Which
reminds me on one thing, and that's a trap. And I would like to mention it here regarding progressive backups, because, for instance, if you have a server that uses multiple hard drives or multiple hard drives volumes for FileMaker Server, and especially when you use encryption, sometimes what can happen is that FileMaker Server starts up faster than the system actually mounts all the volumes. And initially, if you use that separate volume or separate hard drive for progressive backups, what can happen is that before the backup volume mounts to the file system, FileMaker Server actually attempts to start the progressive backup, but it fails because it cannot find the backup hard drive. What happens in this case is that a message appears in the log saying the progressive backup could not be enabled, but that's the only place you can notice it. So you can look at the FileMaker Server admin console. You look at the settings. You see the progressive backups are enabled, but they are not running because there was that message in the log saying progressive backup disabled because it couldn't find the hard drive when the server was starting up. So it's good when you restart a server to always check whether the progressive backups are actually running, maybe 5 minutes after the server restart. Or one thing that we do is that we have a script that on a regular basis compares the last modification time of the progressive backup folder. And if that's older than 10 minutes, then it sends us a notification that the progressive backups may be failing.
There's one thing to this slide that kind of needs to be mentioned as well, and that's only on Linux right now. And that is that you can tunnel the traffic using port 443 on a Linux FileMaker server. And a lot of customers today have a firewall that are really secure, which is really good. And 443 is the traffic for good traffic, meaning secure traffic. Whereas the traffic that we use for FileMaker Pro is on 5003, and none in the world have ever heard about 5003 and why we need that for FileMaker. So having the tunnel being set to run on 443 would actually make it easier for our traffic to run through and back for any of the different firewalls that we might set up. So that's a really, really good thing that we have going forward.
I have a question from the audience about, because you guys were talking about backups recently, and so that popped up. How much resources does the backup take from the server? Because I get advice to back up about every 15 minutes.
Wow, that's a lot. That definitely depends on the solution that you're using. So for our bigger solutions, I do run backups from 8 in the morning until 6 o'clock, and I run them every second hour. And usually that is enough. And I mean, if you have something that you really need to have backs up quite often, the number of backups in a really big solution is going to be gigantic to keep track of. If you have them run every 15 minutes from like early morning to the evening, and you have a solution that is like 50 gig, you need a lot of storage, and storage aren't for free. But like I said, it's definitely up to the different solutions. Do you have any other concerns about that, HOnza?
My suggestion would be check the logs and see how long it takes for the backup to run. You will always see in the event log when the backup starts and when it finishes. And if the backup takes more than just a few seconds, then do worry about it, because when the backup runs, no one can change data in a database. Some time ago, we had a backup set up, and it was a long time ago, but we had a backup set up to run like every 15 minutes, and the backup was running for more than 5 minutes. So out of 15 minutes, the system was unusable for 5 minutes, which is 1/3, and that's definitely bad. Things that also affect the time that it takes to back up your data, and it's important to know, is containers. So if you have a lot of containers, do use external container storage, because that's only taking backup time when you add or change the containers, especially on Mac and Linux, because their FileMaker server can leverage the what is called hard links. So those file systems can have multiple copies of the same file without actually having multiple copies, because the file only exists once on the hard drive, but it can appear in multiple folders. So having multiple backups of external containers on Linux or Mac will only occupy the space on the hard drive once, and it will make all subsequent backups much faster. The other thing is indexes. Indexes, especially in fields which contain unique values, can become very, very large, even larger than the data size itself. So sometimes, and you know, the FileMaker by default sets the fields to have no index, but automatically enable index as needed. which means that as soon as you even mistakenly try to search in a field, FileMaker turns the index for that field on, even if you don't need it. So think about where you have indexes enabled, because they take additional space, and if you don't need the index, it's better to have it completely disabled, because then it does not take that extra space.
But the external containers will not be backed up, or question mark?
Well, external containers can have their own settings in the FileMaker Server admin console, so you can have them backed up, and you can even have them backed up to a different folder or different hard drive, which sometimes can be also useful.
That's the case we always use. We always store all our containers externally, and then we use another scheduler to back up the container to another hard drive somewhere else outside of that computer. But that doesn't have to be done so often, so that's not going to impact any performance on the server.
This has been a really fantastic discussion. I've seen people talking about it in my other chats, going like, oh, this is really interesting. This doesn't necessarily apply to me, but even knowing that this is a potential problem and how to fix it is immensely useful. Yeah, so one of our people has like 100 to 200 WebDirect users. They run a hospital solution, and they have they do WebDirect access only because they don't want to deal with installing and updating on 200 machines in a hospital. So they found this of particular interest.
So that leads me to one question, Johan. What's your experience in terms specifically of WebDirect users and utilizing multiple CPUs? One worker, can one worker utilize more than one CPU for let's say 50 WebDirect users, or all of them using just one CPU?
So first off, for WebDirect, that's the only service where you can have other machines helping you out being working machines. So that's super important to be aware of at start. But then again, WebDirect, as you can see on this slide here, are using multiple machines inside of FileMaker to keep track of everything that you're doing back and forward. If you're doing changes, if you're not doing changes, if you're going back to the layout. So it's really resource heavy. So my suggestion here is that once you start exceeding the number of 50 of WebDirect users that actually are there working on a daily basis, you should start looking into having a second working machine. And then if you reach 100 or a little bit above, you should have 2 working machines. You can have up to 4 working machines. So in total, there will be 5 machines spreading out the workload. And in total, FileMaker is saying that you can have 1,000 WebDirect users at the same time. I doubt they actually try that out, but in theory, they say they can do that.
Yeah, and I have a client who also had some issues with the multiple workers, specifically with exactly reaching maybe 50 or 60 concurrent WebDirect users. There seems to be an issue that's hopefully being fixed in the next update in the 21.1. So if you do have so many WebDirect users, it is worth comparing whether it works better for you to have less or more worker machines. And it's also good to check to recheck this after the new version is released, because that can change. Another thing which is great advice I got just recently from Karl Žužery is there are tools which you can use on the web for testing concurrent WebDirect users quite easily, as long as those testing sites use Chromium as the engine to simulate your users. They should be able to basically act as WebDirect users for you. So if you find a web stress testing tool that's using Chromium, that could be used to test multiple concurrent WebDirect users and running some of your test scripts to simulate what the user normally is doing to see how your server performs with so many users. Okay, there is a long question appearing in or is it a question?
I'll toss it, and then you can say like, oh, I'm not gonna tackle it, or I can tackle it, and then if not, we'll move on, or end up, because we actually are
Yeah,
into the interesting.
so I'm just reading the question. So every now and then when I change something in the database, my FileMaker Pro client freezes. From that point onward, any FileMaker Pro client that tries to modify anything in the database dialog, such as fields, tables, or relationship graph, wow, that's modifying a database schema on the fly, right?
Yeah,
Dangerous.
that's a big no-no.
Yeah.
So
Also,
always keep a dev, a UAT or a test environment and a production environment, and then
Yeah.
have release cycles.
Yeah, he says also freezes until I restart the server. After restarting the server, I can make changes again without issues. This problem doesn't affect any other users or functionalities. Only the database dialog is impacted once the freezing starts.
Usually that is when you're in those views or in setting up privilege sets and you lose connections just a slight little bit, FileMaker can't keep your connection going. And since you're in the structure, that's going to cause a problem for them. I'm not going to say that's the problem here, but that's one of the reasons usually that it's causing the problems. But like I said before, you don't want any development being done once you have a multiple user using a solution, because it will stall all of the users. They might get some of the things that people are trying to post or save not being saved or created like it should. So there are multiple reasons for not doing any changes in production.
Yeah, well, I would say one thing here. In production server, as Johan mentioned, don't make any changes in database schema unless it's absolutely necessary, like resolving an emergency. But there is one more thing you can do. We already mentioned. Let me try to share a different screen here, different window. Now you should see my terminal window. So there is one log, and that's the top call stats. And this is my favorite command. There is an equivalent for Windows PowerShell as well. But if you use tail -f, that's for live watching changes in a file. And this is my favorite way how to see what's happening right now at the FileMaker server. So I just go to logs and top call stats. And now this is showing live and live updating whatever is happening on that server. So let me try to make something connecting to that server, which is my local computer. I'll just open some database. Maybe this one. And you see that it's updating the top call stats log as I'm doing things. So this is the way to see what's happening on the server. And it's also, if you really have to make live changes on the server, a good practice is to open the top call stats log, watch it for a few seconds or minutes, to make sure that nothing important or nothing heavy is happening there before you make those changes. And also watch it while you make those changes, because you will immediately see any task that's taking long and blocking all the other users here. And the easiest way how to watch it is make the terminal window exactly 26 lines, because the top call stats log always logs maximum 25 calls at a time. So this way is the easiest way to watch it. That's just a small tip for watching what's happening on the server right now. David Angel is asking whether it's like a task manager. It may be seen that way. Basically, DOP call stats show you what are the current top most expensive calls the FileMaker server is currently processing. And by default, the interval is set to, I believe, to 30 seconds. I always change it to 1 second because then I can really see live what's happening. And the overhead of the log itself is negligible compared to what you ask the server to do with your database. So I guess we have talked over an hour now. So Johan, do you have any last advice or message to share with the audience?
I'd say that keep track of when your users are starting to get the spinning wheel or the coffee cup, and be aware of what's happening at that time by, for example, looking at the total statistics log to know where your bottlenecks are. They might not be from a specific engine, but then you can find and start working towards having a faster, better perform solution. Because in the end, we all want our users to be happy, and a bottleneck is one of the things that will definitely make them unhappy.
Yes, which
That's a great advice.
we will see you on FMTV tomorrow. But thank you again, Johan, for HOnza coming on. Look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Bye-bye.